guys, Olive here. Today I'm here to bring you my July 2016 wrap-up and my August TBR. It was a pretty successful reading month in July, although it was extremely busy as usual. I managed to finish a lot of the books that I was currently reading at the end of June, which I'm super happy about. I ended up really enjoying a couple of the books I read in July. Some of them I had some mixed feelings about, and then I think I made my July TBR a little bit too ambitious, so there is some run over this month, but let's get started talking about the books. The first book I read was a piece of short fiction that I believe is only available on ebook, and that is Even Hollywood by Amor Towles. This is a kind of a spin-off of a book. It is an extension of Rules of Civility, which I reread in June and of course love. Since it is a spin-off and takes place after some of the events in Rules of Civility, I can't say a ton about it, but it does follow the character of Eve Ross, who was not my favorite character in Rules of Civility, but there is just something about Amor Towles' writing that captivates me right from the beginning of any story that he's telling. Every character has so much personality, and Amor Towles has to spend zero effort in explaining to you what they're like because you can tell just from their behavior, just by the way that he's writing them. He really keeps description to a minimum. He lets you picture things yourself. His writing is just artful. I always want more of it. 5 stars for this one. The only thing I didn't like was that it wasn't a full-length novel. The next book I finished in July was Last Call at the Nightshade Lounge by Paul Kruger. I heard about this one on Liberty Hardy's newsletter. This was a newly published book, and all I read about it on her newsletter was that it contained cocktails and magic, and that was pretty much all it took to convince me to read it. This is about a girl named Bailey Chen who is fresh out of business school and just cannot find a job. She uses a family connection to get a job as a barback at her local bar in Chicago. While she's working one night, she accidentally discovers that if mixed perfectly, a cocktail can yield magical powers to its imbiber. The magical power you receive upon drinking one of these magical cocktails varies based on the type of cocktail you're having. And because she discovers this by accident, she is let in on the fact that there is a conglomerate of bartenders who use these magical cocktails to fight otherworldly creatures who are attacking the city of Chicago. I liked the concept of this book more than I liked the execution. It jumped back and forth between being really cool and funny and super corny. I really got the feeling throughout this entire book that the author was trying so desperately to seem cool and inventive, and what resulted was kind of weird and not exactly amazing. I gave this one 2 stars. The next book I finished was Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll. This is about a woman in her late 20s living in New York City. Her name is Tiffany. She works at a cosmopolitan-esque magazine. She is engaged to a very attractive, very wealthy guy. She has been trying throughout her 20s to work her way up from her more humbler beginnings in suburban Philadelphia. But along with planning her wedding, she also has something else on her agenda that threatens to expose all of the deep, dark secrets that she has been trying to hide. This book is gritty with a capital G. Tiffany, or Ani as she goes by in adulthood, is a ballbuster in personality, but you can tell by her behavior and her insecurities that she is a very fragile person. It was interesting to see the parallels between this book that I read this month and Rules of Civility that I read last month, because although they take place in 2 totally different time periods, Rules of Civility takes place in 1938, this book takes place more in the present day, they were very similar in that New York City proves an attractive place for young women of more humbler means to want to improve their status in society. And not just young women. New York City always seems to have this appeal for people wanting to start over or transform themselves in some way. Overall, I thought this was an interesting book. It had a lot of twists and turns, not all of which I saw coming. It's not for everyone, but I thought it was a decent book. I gave it 3 stars. The next book I finished was one off of my Young Professional TBR. That was Moonwalking with Einstein, The Art and Science of Remembering Everything by Joshua Foer. Joshua Foer was just your everyday journalist with your everyday memory capacity when he covered the United States Memory Championship. He became ferociously intrigued with this competition and with the techniques that people were calling the art of memory. He decided that he wanted to start using this technique and try to train for the event himself. The art of memory is actually based off of an ancient technique that uses human superior ability of spatial memory to memorize just about anything. I will not be able to explain the memory technique as well as the book does, but it uses memory palaces and memorable images using spatial memory to memorize things very easily. Joshua Foer trains for a year and then competes in the next memory championship. I won't tell you how that turns out. Nonfiction can have spoilers too. This was a really exciting, really engaging read. I absolutely loved it. It is one that I want to purchase at one point so I can revisit it in the future. 5 stars, I just loved it. The next book I finished in July was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I have now officially completed the Harry Potter series and by extension have finished my project, A Grown Woman Finally Reads Harry Potter. I just recently posted the very last video for that series in which I talk about this book and my feelings on this series as a whole. I will post a link to that video down below if you are interested in watching it, but just be forewarned, it's not gushy. The next book I finished in July was a buddy read I did with Elena over at Elena Reads Books, and we read The Yonolosi Riding Camp for Girls by Anton Disclafani. The fact that I read this with Elena was the only positive part of this reading experience. This book is at the center of 2 circles of a Venn diagram. One circle is boring, and the other circle is weird. I had no idea something could be dull and strange at the same time, but I'd like to thank this book for proving to me that it's possible. This book is set in the 1930s. It is about a 15-year-old girl named Thea who is sent by her wealthy family from her home in Florida to a riding camp in North Carolina after she has done something wrong. It is not entirely clear what she has done wrong at the beginning of the book, but it starts to unravel. It is quite predictable, as Elena and I found. Since it is set in North Carolina, there are Southern elements that are attempted to be woven in. You have some relationships with the other girls at the camp. There's also the headmaster, his wife, and their 3 children, and the relationship between Thea and that whole family. This book hops back and forth in time between Thea's time spent at the camp and then flashbacks of what was going on in her life before she was sent away. I can't even really think of anything else to say about this book. Elena and I, in our messages back and forth to each other, we just never really had much to say about it because it felt like nothing was happening in this book. And then everything that did happen was weird and illogical and creepy. The writing didn't take anything far enough. I admittedly went into this book because I wanted the atmosphere of that riding camp. I love historical fiction set in the 1930s, and I was really hoping that this book would evoke that. And maybe it wasn't fair for me to read this right away because I just finished Rules of Civility last month, which to me does the 1930s perfectly. But the atmosphere, the setting in general, the characters, Anton Disclafani stopped before she got anywhere with developing anything in this book. Nothing that happens in this book makes any kind of a statement. Certainly her writing leaves a lot to be desired. I think the right word for this book is just uninspiring. Also, do you see how this blurb says that this book is sexy? If you think this book is sexy, then you have one fucked up notion of what is sexy. Seek help. The next book I read I actually liked, and that was The Ecliptic by Benjamin Wood. I had been currently reading this one for forever. I got it from NetGalley a long time ago, and it just wasn't pulling me in the first 50 pages, so I kind of stopped reading it, and I really regret doing that. I really have a knack for putting a book down right before it starts to get amazing. I ended up picking up the audiobook version of this book in order to gain some momentum, and I'm really glad I did. The narrator was fantastic. This is about an artist's refuge on an island off of the coast of Turkey. There is a new arrival coming to this refuge. He's only 17 years old, and so the provost asks the long-timers of the artist's refuge, who have been there for many years, to help him get settled in. This artist retreat is extremely exclusive. You're only able to know about it from someone else who has already been there. You have a sponsor who pays for your time there. And while you are there, you are just supposed to exclusively focus on your work and drown out everything else. They don't have clocks. Everything is very regimented to just allow artists to focus on their work. Everyone is also given a fake name when they come to the refuge, And our main character, her real name is Elspeth Conroy. She's a painter, but while she's at the camp, she's known by Nell. When the 17-year-old boy comes to the camp, he's very odd, and there are some things that happen that kind of shake things up at the refuge. There are kind of 3 different sections of this book. The first one takes place at the refuge, and then the second part really focuses in on Elspeth's, our main character's, backstory. That's where things really start to pick up with this book. I'm not going to tell you what the third part entails because that's for you to discover if you want to read this book. But as someone who is not an artist and has honestly trouble understanding art and understanding artistic inspiration and the different methods of artistic expression, this book made it so incredibly easy to just kind of fall into what it must feel like as an artist who is struggling to be creative. Elspeth is a struggling painter. We see her backstory starting from the 1960s when she is in the London art scene. She comes to this refuge trying to work on a piece of art that has been troubling her. This book is extremely intelligent and is making you think pretty much the entire time. It has lots of different twists and turns. My brain was working the whole time, which I love. In September, I'm going to be buddy reading The Bellwether Revivals, which is Benjamin Wood's first book with Brittany from Under the Radar Books. And now I am absolutely chomping at the bit to get to this book. His writing is incredible. Gave it 5 stars, loved it, highly recommend. And then finally, I managed to finish The Romanoffs, The Final Chapter by Robert K. Massey. I'm not going to talk about this one much because I am going to do an author profile where I'm going to talk about all of Robert K. Massey's books on Russian history. So I will talk more about this book when I post that video. And then miraculously, I'm only currently reading one book, which is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. It is just as good as I thought it was going to be so far, even though I am not very far into it. You will probably not hear me talk about this in my August wrap-up because I am really hoping to do a review of this one and post it right before this book comes out in early September. And then, as I mentioned, there is some run over from July's TBR into August TBR because I was a little bit overly ambitious. I am still planning on reading The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And then there are these 3, Mad Miss Mimic, Under the Black Flag, and We the Drowned that I'm going to see if I can get to. I'm going to be buddy reading Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel with Leanne from Leanne Rose. I'm planning on rereading Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which I could not be more excited for. Off of my Young Professional TBR, I'm planning on listening to The Ascent of Money by Niall Ferguson on audiobook. And then 2 other ones that I may try to get to in the month of August are 5 Miles from Outer Hope by Nicola Barker and Crescent by Diana Abu-Jaber. I have a little bit of a break from school in August, so I'm hoping I have more reading time. I do have a little bit of traveling planned, but not so much that I think it will seriously cut into my reading time. If you have read any of these, heard of any of these, I would love to chat with you in the comments section below. If you'd like to reach me anywhere else on the internet, all of the links to my social media profiles are in the description box below. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.